The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine marble floors of the Ashworth mansion, its golden rays filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the manicured gardens of Beacon Hill. Boston's elite neighborhood hummed with the quiet efficiency of old money and older traditions, where every blade of grass was perfectly trimmed and every wrought iron gate gleamed with fresh paint. Maria Elena Vasquez moved through these halls like a ghost, her worn sneakers silent against the polished stone. At 52, she had perfected the art of invisibility, a skill born from necessity rather than choice. Her small frame carried the weight of 23 years spent cleaning, organizing, and maintaining the lives of people who saw her as nothing more than an extension of their household appliances. "The help will take care of it," Mrs. Catherine Ashworth would say to her guests, never bothering to learn that Maria Elena had a name, a history, dreams that extended far beyond the confines of these opulent walls. To the Ashworth family and their social circle, she was simply part of the scenery, present but unnoticed, essential but unacknowledged. The autumn air carried a crisp bite as Maria Elena opened the French doors to air out the living room. October in Boston painted the city in brilliant reds and golds, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection inside the mansion. She paused for a moment, allowing herself to breathe in the fresh air that carried hints of fallen leaves and the distant aroma of coffee from the cafes in the North End, a neighborhood that felt like another world, despite being only a few miles away. "Maria!" Mrs. Ashworth's voice cut through the morning silence like a knife. Maria Elena had long ago stopped correcting the pronunciation. Her name was Maria Elena, not the harsh anglicized version that rolled off the tongues of her employers, but after years of futile attempts, she had learned to respond to whatever variation they chose to use. "Yes, Mrs. Ashworth," she replied, her voice steady and professional, masking the small ache that still accompanied being stripped of her identity daily. Catherine Ashworth descended the grand staircase, her silk robe flowing behind her like a royal train. At 45, she possessed the kind of beauty that money could maintain, perfectly highlighted hair, skin that showed no signs of stress or hardship, manicured nails that had never known manual labor. She moved through her world with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in it. "We're having the Weatherbees over for dinner tonight. I need the good china cleaned and the dining room polished until it sparkles. And make sure to prepare the guest room. Margaret might stay over if she has too much wine again." Mrs. Ashworth delivered these instructions while scrolling through her phone, never making eye contact with Maria Elena. "Of course, Mrs. Ashworth. Anything specific for dinner?" "Oh, you know what we like. Something impressive but not too heavy. And make sure the flowers in the foyer are fresh. The ones from yesterday look tired." With that dismissal, Catherine glided toward the kitchen, leaving Maria Elena to begin another day of invisible labor. As Maria Elena gathered her cleaning supplies, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her dark hair, streaked with premature gray from years of stress and hard work, was pulled back in a neat bun. Her brown eyes, once bright with dreams and possibilities, had developed a weariness that spoke of countless mornings that began before dawn and days that ended long after the family had retired to their comfortable beds. She had arrived in Boston 25 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of hope. At 27, she had been a teacher in El Salvador, respected in her community and passionate about education. But civil unrest and economic instability had forced her to make the agonizing decision to leave everything behind and seek a better life in America, not just for herself but for the children she hoped to have someday. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had traded a classroom where students called her Maestra Elena, with respect and affection, for houses where she was simply the help. But survival had required adaptation, and adaptation had meant accepting a role that rendered her voiceless and nameless in the lives of those she served. The morning routine was as familiar as breathing. Start with the kitchen. Ensure the coffee was perfect for Mr. Ashworth's 7 a.m. departure to his law firm. Check that his newspapers were arranged just so, his breakfast prepared exactly as he liked it. Then move through the house room by room, erasing any evidence that the family lived there, restoring each space to magazine-perfect condition. By noon, the mansion gleamed under Maria Elena's careful attention. The dining room table reflected the crystal chandelier above it. Like still water, the guest room bed was made with hospital corners that could bounce a quarter, and the foyer flowers had been replaced with fresh white orchids that cost more than Maria Elena earned in a week. She was polishing the silver when the doorbell rang, an unusual occurrence during the afternoon hours when the family was typically out pursuing their various activities. Mrs. Ashworth was at her tennis lesson, Mr. Ashworth was at the office, and their teenage daughter Madison was at her private school. Through the ornate front door's glass panels, Maria Eleanor could see a young woman standing on the steps, a worn backpack slung over her shoulder and a camera hanging around her neck. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with auburn hair that caught the afternoon sunlight and an easy smile that seemed genuine rather than practiced. "Good afternoon," the woman said when Maria Elena opened the door. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I'm working on a photography project about the history of Beacon Hill. I was wondering if I could ask someone about this beautiful house. It has such incredible architecture." Maria Elena glanced back toward the house's interior, suddenly conscious of her position. She wasn't authorized to speak for the family or represent the household in any official capacity. "The family isn't home right now. You might want to come back later when—" "Oh, I'm not looking to speak with the owners necessarily," Sarah interrupted with a warm smile. "I'm interested in the stories of the people who make these houses homes, the history that doesn't make it into the guidebooks." She paused, studying Maria Elena's face with curious eyes. "You work here?" The question was simple, but something in Sarah's tone was different. There was no assumption of invisibility, no dismissal in her gaze. Maria Elena found herself nodding. "Yes, I take care of the house." "How long have you worked here?" 23 years. Sarah's eyebrows rose with genuine interest. 23 years. You must have seen so many changes, so much history pass through these halls. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions? I bet you know more about the real story of this place than anyone." For a moment, Maria Elena stood frozen in the doorway. When was the last time someone had asked her opinion about anything? When had anyone expressed interest in her perspective or experience? She glanced nervously at the street, checking for Mrs. Ashworth's car. I don't think I should. The family wouldn't—" "What's your name?" Sarah asked gently. The question hit Maria Elena like a physical force. Her name. Someone was asking for her name. Not the help or Maria, but her actual name, asked with the simple courtesy of one human being acknowledging another. "Maria Elena," she whispered, then cleared her throat and spoke with more strength. "Maria Elena Vasquez. It's nice to meet you, Maria Elena. I'm Sarah." The photographer extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Maria Elena shook it. Sarah's grip was firm and warm, the handshake of someone who saw her as an equal. "I really shouldn't talk while they're not here," Maria Elena said, but she didn't close the door. "I understand," Sarah replied, "but maybe, could I just sit on the steps for a moment? It's been a long day of walking around the neighborhood, and I could use a break." Without invitation, Sarah settled herself on the mansion's front steps, patting the stone beside her. After a moment of internal struggle, Maria Elena found herself stepping outside and sitting down, something she had never done in all her years of working at the house. The view from the front steps was different than from inside. From here she could see the tree-lined street, watch the occasional jogger pass by, observe the rhythm of the neighborhood from a perspective she'd never experienced as part of her work duties. "This is a beautiful neighborhood," Sarah observed, adjusting her camera lens, "but I imagine it can feel pretty isolated sometimes." Maria Elena glanced at her with surprise. How had this stranger perceived something that Maria Elena herself had never articulated, even in her own thoughts? "It's very quiet," Maria Elena agreed carefully. "What's it like, working in a place like this? Does it ever feel, I don't know, like you're living in two different worlds?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications and possibilities. Maria Elena felt something stirring inside her, a recognition perhaps that here was someone asking not for her labor or her service, but for her truth. As she sat on those steps in the afternoon sunshine, with a stranger who had bothered to learn her name, Maria Elena began to feel something she hadn't experienced in years, the sensation of being seen. Not as the help, not as an invisible presence maintaining someone else's life, but as Maria Elena Vasquez, a woman with her own story, her own perspective, her own dreams that had been deferred but never quite extinguished. The moment stretched between them, pregnant with possibility, as Maria Elena contemplated a question no one had ever asked her before. Not what she could do for someone else, but what she thought, what she felt, what she remembered of the woman she used to be before she learned to disappear. The conversation on the front steps lasted only 20 minutes, but it felt like stepping through a doorway Maria Elena hadn't even known existed. When Mrs. Ashworth's BMW pulled into the circular driveway, both women stood quickly, the spell broken by the reality of Maria Elena's position. "Thank you for your time, Maria Elena," Sarah said. her voice carrying a warmth that made the housekeeper's name sound like music. "I hope we can talk again soon." As Sarah walked away, her camera bag bouncing against her hip, Maria Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of something that had been tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. She smoothed her uniform and hurried back inside, but the echo of her own name, spoken with respect, lingered in her ears. Was someone at the door? "Mrs. Ashworth asked, not looking up from her phone as she kicked off her tennis shoes in the foyer. "A photographer, Mrs. Ashworth. She was documenting the neighborhood's architecture. I told her you weren't available." "Good. We don't need random people bothering us." Catherine disappeared upstairs without another word, leaving Maria Elena alone with the weight of what had just transpired. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of dinner preparations. Maria Elena found herself moving through familiar tasks, preparing the duck confit, polishing wine glasses, arranging place settings, but her mind kept drifting to Sarah's questions. When was the last time someone had been curious about her experiences, her thoughts, her life beyond these walls? That evening, as the Weatherbys and Ashworths laughed over their elaborate dinner, Maria Elena served each course with her usual invisible efficiency. But tonight, she found herself listening differently to their conversations, really hearing the casual entitlement in their voices, the way they discussed their household stuff, like pieces of furniture that occasionally malfunctioned. "Our girl has been with us for ages," Mrs. Ashworth was saying to Margaret Weatherby. "Barely speaks English when she started, but she's learned enough to follow instructions. She's very reliable." Maria Elena's hands trembled slightly as she cleared the salad plates. 23 years, and this was how her service was characterized, barely speaking English, following instructions like a trained animal. The woman who had once taught literature to high school students, who had loved Neruda's poetry and could recite Garcia Lorca from memory, reduced to a collection of functional capabilities. "The help these days," Mr. Weatherby chuckled, cutting into his duck. "Remember when domestics knew their place? Now they want benefits, time off, all sorts of nonsense." "We're fortunate with ours," Mr. Ashworth replied. "Never asks for anything extra, knows her job and does it." As Maria Elena retreated to the kitchen, their words followed her like shadows. She had never asked for anything extra because she had learned that asking was futile, that her needs were invisible just like the rest of her. She had accepted overtime without additional pay, worked through illnesses, missed family gatherings, and shaped her entire life around the convenience of others. But tonight, for the first time in years, she felt angry. The dinner party ended near midnight, and Maria Elena spent another hour cleaning up, loading the dishwasher, hand-washing the crystal, wiping down every surface until it gleamed. When she finally gathered her worn coat and purse, the house was silent, except for the hum of expensive appliances. The ride home on the late-night bus took her from the pristine streets of Beacon Hill to East Boston, where her small apartment waited in a 3-story building that housed mostly immigrants and working-class families. The contrast was jarring, from marble floors and Persian rugs to cracked linoleum and thin walls that transmitted every sound from her neighbors. But tonight, instead of the usual exhaustion that accompanied her journey home, Maria Elena felt restless. She climbed the narrow stairs to her second-floor apartment, her mind still processing the afternoon's unexpected encounter. Her apartment was tiny but meticulously clean, a one-bedroom space that she had furnished with careful thrift store finds and items the Ashworths had discarded over the years. The walls were decorated with photographs from El Salvador, her parents' house with its bright blue walls, her sister's wedding, her former students at their graduation ceremony. On her small kitchen table sat a stack of English as a second language textbooks and notebooks filled with her careful handwriting. For 5 years, she had been taking night classes at the community college, slowly working toward a teaching certificate that would allow her to work in American schools. It was a dream she pursued in secret, afraid that even acknowledging it aloud might make it disappear. That night, Maria Elena couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of café con leche, staring at her reflection in the dark window. Sarah's questions echoed in her mind. What's it like working in a place like this? Does it ever feel like you're living in 2 different worlds? 2 worlds. The phrase captured something she had never been able to articulate. There was the world where she was Maria Elena Vasquez, teacher, daughter, woman with opinions and dreams and a history that mattered. And there was the world where she was simply the help, silent, invisible, existing only to maintain the comfort of others. For 23 years, she had kept these worlds carefully separate, never allowing one to intrude upon the other. But Sarah's simple act of asking her name had created a crack in that barrier, and Maria Elena could feel something shifting. The next morning brought rain to Boston, the kind of steady drizzle that made the city look like a watercolor painting with bleeding edges. Maria Elena arrived at the Ashworth house earlier than usual, hoping to lose herself in work and quiet the questions that had kept her awake. But as she unlocked the service entrance and stepped into the kitchen, she found a small envelope on the counter with her name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Her heart raced as she opened it, wondering who could have left it there. Inside was a note from Sarah, written on simple white paper. "Maria Elena, thank you for taking the time to talk with me yesterday. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I'd love to continue it if you're interested. I'll be at Cafe Vittoria in the North End tomorrow Saturday at 2 p.m. I hope you can join me. Best, Sarah." At the bottom of the note was a postscript. "I asked myself into the garden yesterday before you came back inside. I hope that's okay. I wanted to make sure you got this." Maria Elena read the note 3 times, her hands shaking slightly. Saturday was her day off, the one day each week when she could pretend for a few hours that she existed outside the role of domestic worker. Usually she spent it doing laundry, grocery shopping, studying, or video calling her sister in El Salvador. The idea of meeting someone, a stranger who had shown genuine interest in her thoughts, felt both thrilling and terrifying. As she began her morning routine, Maria Elena's mind raced with possibilities and fears. What would they talk about? What if Sarah's interest had been temporary, just polite conversation? What if Maria Elena's English wasn't good enough for a real discussion? What if someone saw them together and reported back to the Ashworths? But beneath the anxiety, something else stirred. A flutter of excitement she hadn't felt in years. Someone wanted to hear her story. Someone thought her experiences were worth documenting, worth remembering. Throughout the day, as she cleaned and organized and prepared for another evening meal, Maria Elena found herself composing mental responses to questions Sarah might ask. She remembered details she hadn't thought about in years. The smell of her classroom in San Salvador, the pride in her students' faces when they mastered a difficult concept, the respect in her colleagues' voices when they discussed literature and pedagogy. That evening, as she served dinner to the Ashworth family, Maria Elena caught herself standing a little straighter. When Mrs. Ashworth asked her to adjust the thermostat, she replied with a clear, "Yes, Mrs. Ashworth," instead of the barely audible whisper that had become her default. It was a small change, but it felt monumental. Later, as she was cleaning the kitchen, Madison Ashworth wandered in looking for a snack. At 17, Madison was a beautiful girl with her mother's blonde hair and her father's sharp features, but her eyes held a restlessness that reminded Maria Elena of herself at that age. "Hey," Madison said, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. "You've been here forever, haven't you?" The question caught Maria Elena off guard. In all her years of working for the family, Madison had rarely acknowledged her existence beyond basic requests. "Yes, Miss Madison, a long time. Did you ever want to do something else? Like before you worked here?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with teenage curiosity and something deeper, a recognition perhaps that even adults sometimes found themselves in lives they hadn't planned. For a moment, Maria Elena considered her usual response, a polite deflection that would maintain the appropriate boundaries between employer and employee. But something about Madison's expression and the fresh memory of Sarah's genuine interest made her pause. "I was a teacher," Maria Elena said quietly. "In my country, I taught literature to students about your age." Madison's eyes widened with surprise. "Really? That's so cool. Why don't you teach here?" Don't you... Complicated," Maria Elena replied, unwilling to burden a teenager with the complexities of immigration, credential recognition, and economic necessity. "Could you, though, if you wanted to?" The question pierced straight through to the heart of Maria Elena's carefully buried dreams. "Maybe," she whispered. "Someday." Madison nodded thoughtfully, taking a bite of her apple. "You should. I bet you'd be a good teacher. You explain things really well when I ask you stuff about cooking or whatever." As Madison left the kitchen, Maria Elena stood frozen by the sink, processing the brief exchange. Even the Ashworth daughter had seen something in her that the parents had missed entirely. Intelligence, capability, the potential to be more than just the help. That night, as Maria Elena prepared for bed in her small apartment, she made a decision. Tomorrow, she would go to Cafe Vittoria. She would sit across from Sarah Mitchell and answer her questions honestly. She would allow herself for a few hours to exist as Maria Elena Vasquez, not just the invisible woman who cleaned other people's lives, but a person with stories worth telling and dreams worth pursuing. As she drifted off to sleep, for the first time in years, Maria Elena allowed herself to imagine a different future. One where her voice mattered, where her name was spoken with respect, where the two worlds she inhabited might finally become one. Saturday afternoon found Maria Elena standing outside Cafe Vittoria in Boston's North End, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. The historic neighborhood buzzed with weekend energy, families strolling past the old Italian bakeries, tourists snapping photos of the narrow cobblestone streets, the aroma of fresh bread and espresso drifting from every doorway. She had changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on a simple navy dress she had bought years ago but rarely wore. It was the kind of outfit that belonged to Maria Elena Vasquez, the person, not Maria Elena, the housekeeper. Looking at her reflection before leaving her apartment, she had barely recognized herself. Through the cafe's large windows, she spotted Sarah at a corner table, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light as she scribbled in a notebook. A professional camera and several photography books were scattered across the small table, and she looked completely absorbed in her work. For a moment, Maria Elena considered turning around, walking back to the bus stop, returning to the safety of invisibility. But something about Sarah's concentrated expression, the same look Maria Elena used to see on her students' faces when they were genuinely engaged with a text, drew her forward. She pushed open the cafe door, and the rich scent of roasted coffee beans enveloped her like a warm embrace. Maria Elena! Maria! Sarah looked up with genuine delight, her face breaking into the kind of smile that reached her eyes. "I'm so glad you came. Please, sit." As Maria Elena settled into the chair across from her, Sarah signaled to the barista. "What would you like to drink?" "My treat. Just coffee, please. Black." Maria Elena's voice sounded smaller than she intended, still caught between her two worlds. "Are you sure? They make an incredible cappuccino here. Actually, you know what? Let me order for both of us. I have a feeling you might like to try something new." Sarah's tone was encouraging rather than presumptuous, and when she returned with 2 steaming cups topped with perfect foam art, Maria Elena found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "Thank you," Maria Elena said, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "This is very kind. It's nothing. I'm the one who should be thanking you for taking time out of your day off." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. "I've been thinking about our conversation all week. There's something about your story, about the stories of women like you, that I think people need to hear." Maria Elena took a careful sip of the cappuccino, surprised by its creamy sweetness. When was the last time someone had bought her coffee? When had she last sat in a cafe as a customer, rather than someone cleaning tables or serving others? "I'm not sure I have much of a story to tell," Maria Elena said quietly. "Are you kidding?" Sarah's eyes widened. 23 years in one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods. You've watched an entire generation grow up, seen families change, witnessed the city transform. And that's just the professional side. What about your own journey? Where did you come from? What brought you to Boston? The questions hung in the air between them, and Maria Elena felt that familiar tightening in her chest, the instinct to deflect, to minimize, to remain safely invisible. But something in Sarah's expression, an open curiosity without judgment, made her take a different path. "I came from El Salvador," Maria Elena began slowly. "In 1999, I was a teacher there." "What did you teach?" "Literature, high school students, Spanish literature, some Latin American poetry." As she spoke, Maria Elena felt something loosening inside her, like a long-held breath finally being released. "I loved Garcia Lorca, Neruda, Benedetti. I used to help my students write their own poems, enter them in local competitions." Sarah's pen moved quickly across her notebook, but her eyes never left Maria Elena's face. "That sounds incredible. You must have been good at it. Teaching, I mean. It takes a special person to inspire teenagers to write poetry." The compliment hit Maria Elena like sunshine after a long winter. When was the last time someone had praised her professional skills, her intellect, her ability to inspire others? Yes, I think I was good at it. My students seem to enjoy my classes. Some of them still write to me sometimes on Facebook. They're doctors now, engineers, teachers themselves. What made you leave? The question Maria Elena had been dreading, the one that always led to explanations she wasn't sure anyone could truly understand. She stared into her cappuccino, watching the foam slowly dissolve. The war was ending, but the country was still very unstable. No jobs, violence, poverty. I had a chance to come here to work for a family who needed help with their household. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I could get my teaching credentials recognized, learn better English, save some money. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. 23 years temporary. Sarah reached across the table and briefly touched Maria Elena's hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried a weight of understanding that nearly brought tears to Maria Elena's eyes. What happened with the teaching credentials? It's complicated. The bureaucracy, the costs, the time. I needed to work immediately to survive, to send money back home. My mother was sick. My sister had children. There was always something more urgent than my dreams. Maria Elena paused, surprised by her own honesty. And after a while, I think I forgot that I deserved to have dreams. But you haven't forgotten completely, Sarah observed. I can see it in your eyes when you talk about your students, about literature. That passion doesn't just disappear. Maria Elena looked up sharply. How had this woman, this stranger, seen something that Maria Elena herself had barely acknowledged? I've been taking classes, she admitted quietly, at night, after work. ESL classes first, then some education courses. Very slowly, very carefully, I'm working toward getting certified to teach here. That's amazing. Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. How close are you? Maybe 2 more years if I can manage the student teaching requirement, but it means taking time off from the Ashworths, and I'm not sure. Maria Elena trailed off, the familiar weight of practical concerns settling back onto her shoulders. What would you teach if you could teach anything you wanted? The question sparked something in Maria Elena's chest, a flame she had kept carefully banked for years. English as a second language, maybe, or literature if I could qualify. I think about immigrant students, kids who feel caught between 2 languages, 2 cultures. I understand that feeling. I bet you do. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying Maria Elena with thoughtful eyes. Can I ask you something else? Do the people you work for, the Ashworths, do they know about your background, your education? Maria Elena almost laughed. No, they know I'm from El Salvador, that I've been with them a long time, that I follow instructions well. That's all they need to know about the help. They call you that? The help. Mrs. Ashworth does, or just Maria, though that's not really my name. They've never asked what I prefer to be called. Maria Elena was surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. She had accepted this treatment for so long that acknowledging it aloud felt almost rebellious. Sarah's pen had stopped moving, and her expression had darkened. That's dehumanizing. The word hit Maria Elena like a physical blow, not because it was untrue, but because it was so precisely, devastatingly accurate. Dehumanizing. That was exactly what it was. This systematic erasure of her identity, her intelligence, her worth as a human being. I never thought of it that way, Maria Elena whispered, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. She had felt it, this slow erosion of self, but she had never had a word for it. Can I share something with you? Sarah asked. I've been working on this photography project for 6 months now, documenting the invisible workforce that keeps Boston running. Housekeepers, nannies, gardeners, drivers, people who make other people's lives possible, but are rarely acknowledged or seen. And what I've found over and over is women like you, is educated, talented, intelligent women who have been reduced to a single function in someone else's life. Maria Elena felt her throat tighten. Why do you care? About people like me? Sarah was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. My grandmother was an immigrant. She came from Ireland in the 1940s, worked as a maid for wealthy families in Cambridge. She was brilliant, could do math in her head faster than most people could with a calculator, spoke 3 languages, read everything she could get her hands on. But to the families she worked for, she was just Bridget the Irish girl. She died, never having had the chance to show the world who she really was. The parallel was clear, and it sent a shiver through Maria Elena. How many women like Sarah's grandmother, like herself, had lived and died as footnotes in other people's stories? I want to change that, Sarah continued. I want to document these stories, show people the real human beings behind the invisible labor, but I can't do it without the women themselves being willing to step forward to be seen. What do you mean? I mean, I'd like to photograph you, interview you properly, tell your story, the real story of Maria Elena Vasquez, teacher and student and dreamer, not just the help. Sarah's eyes were bright with possibility. Would you consider it? The request hung between them like a bridge. Maria Elena wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. Being photographed, being interviewed, having her story told, it meant stepping out of the shadows she had inhabited for over 2 decades. It meant risk. I don't know, Maria Elena said. What if the Ashworths saw it? What if I lost my job? What if you didn't? Sarah countered gently. What if telling your story opened doors you didn't even know existed? What if there are other women out there who need to hear that they're not alone, that their dreams still matter? Maria Elena stared out the cafe window at the bustling street, watching people move through their Saturday afternoon lives with purpose and direction. She thought about her students in El Salvador, wondered what they would think of their former teacher now. She thought about the other domestic workers she occasionally encountered at the grocery store or on the bus, women who, like her, seemed to carry the weight of invisible lives. I need time to think, Maria Elena said finally. Of course, take all the time you need. Sarah pulled a business card from her purse and wrote something on the back. This is my number. Call me when you're ready or if you just want to talk. No pressure. As they gathered their things to leave, Sarah paused. Maria Elena, can I ask you one more question? Yes. What do you dream of? When you're alone at night, when no one is watching, when you can be completely honest with yourself, what do you dream of? The question followed Maria Elena all the way home on the bus, echoing in her mind as she climbed the stairs to her apartment. What did she dream of? For so long, her dreams had been practical things, paying rent, staying healthy, keeping her job. But underneath those survival dreams, something else stirred. She dreamed of standing in front of a classroom again, of seeing that spark of understanding in a student's eyes. She dreamed of being called Professor Vasquez instead of the help. She dreamed of being seen, known, valued for who she really was. As she sat in her small kitchen that evening, Sarah's business card on the table before her, Maria Elena realized that for the first time in 23 years, those dreams didn't feel impossible. They felt terrifying, yes, but also achingly, beautifully possible. The weight of her stories, or the stories she had carried in silence for so long, pressed against her chest, demanding to be told. The business card sat on Maria Elena's kitchen table for 3 days, its edges becoming worn from her nervous handling. Sarah's question echoed in her mind during every task at the Ashworth house. What do you dream of? The simple inquiry had unlocked something that Maria Elena wasn't sure she could contain anymore. Monday morning arrived with November's sharp bite, the last autumn leaves clinging desperately to the oak trees lining Beacon Hill's pristine streets. Maria Elena moved through her usual routine with mechanical precision, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying conversations, imagining possibilities, wrestling with fears that had kept her safe in invisibility for over 2 decades. Maria! Mrs. Ashworth's voice cut through her thoughts as she was polishing the silver tea service. I need you to be extra careful with the house this week. We're having the benefit committee over on Thursday to plan the winter gala, and everything must be perfect. Of course, Mrs. Ashworth. The response was automatic, but for the first time, Maria Elena found herself really looking at her employer. Catherine Ashworth stood in the doorway, wearing a designer yoga outfit that cost more than Maria Elena earned in a month, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against her phone case. And make sure the guest bathroom is immaculate. Margaret Weatherby has been talking about redecorating, and I don't want her finding any flaws in our housekeeping. Mrs. Ashworth paused, seeming to notice Maria Elena's direct gaze for the first time in years. Is there something wrong? You look different today. The observation caught Maria Elena off guard. Different. Was it possible that her internal shift was somehow visible? No, Mrs. Ashworth, everything is fine. Good. Oh, and we'll need the good china for 12, the crystal glasses, and fresh flowers in every room. Spare no expense. This event could raise over $2 million for the Children's Hospital. Catherine turned to leave, then stopped. You know, Maria, you've been with us so long. I sometimes forget you're even here. You're like part of the furniture. The comment, clearly intended as a compliment about her reliability, hit Maria Elena like a physical blow. Part of the furniture, not even human enough to be noticed, just another household object that performed its function without thought or feeling. As Mrs. Ashworth's footsteps faded up the marble staircase, Maria Elena stood frozen in the dining room, the silver polish cloth trembling in her hands. Sarah's words from Saturday rang in her ears. That's dehumanizing. Now she understood not just the meaning, but the weight of that word. She wasn't being treated badly. She wasn't being treated as human at all. The realization sparked something dangerous inside her chest. Anger. Not the quiet resignation she had carried for years, but a bright, clean fury that demanded acknowledgement. She was Maria Elena Vasquez, former teacher of literature, current student working toward her certification. a woman who had inspired teenagers to write poetry and had once been respected for her intellect and passion. She was not furniture. That afternoon, while the Ashworth family was out at their various activities, Maria Elena found herself doing something she had never done before. She walked through the house as if she belonged there, not skulking along the edges, not hurrying from task to task, but walking with purpose through rooms she had cleaned thousands of times, but never truly occupied. In Mr. Ashworth's study, she paused before the wall of legal books and diplomas. Harvard Law School, summa cum laude, Order of the Coif. She thought about her own education, Universidad de El Salvador, graduated with honors, award for excellence in literary analysis. Her diploma was in a box in her closet, never displayed, never mentioned, never acknowledged as having any value in this country. In Madison's room, she noticed the college brochures scattered across the unmade bed. Harvard, Yale, Brown. All doors that would open automatically for the 17-year-old simply because of the family she had been born into. Maria Elena thought about her own students in El Salvador, brilliant minds trapped by poverty and circumstance, and felt the familiar ache of injustice. But it was in the living room, surrounded by family photographs and expensive art, that Maria Elena made her decision. Hanging above the fireplace was a massive oil painting of the Ashworth family, professionally done, everyone posed in perfect harmony, wearing clothes that cost more than Maria Elena's annual income. Below it on the mantelpiece sat smaller framed photos, family vacations, graduation ceremonies, social events. 23 years of her life had been spent maintaining this shrine to their happiness, and she appeared in none of it, not even in the background, completely erased from the visual history of a family whose daily life she had shaped and supported. Maria Elena pulled out her phone and stared at Sarah's number. Her finger hovered over the call button for a long moment before she pressed it. "Sarah, it's Maria Elena. I want to do the interview. The photography project. I want to tell my story." "Maria Elena, I'm so glad you called. Are you sure? I want you to feel completely comfortable with this decision." "I'm sure." And as she said it, Maria Elena realized she was. The anger had crystallized into something stronger, determination. "When do you want to start? How about tomorrow? It's your day off, right? We could meet somewhere comfortable for you, maybe your apartment if you'd be okay with that. I'd like to photograph you in your own space, show the contrast between the two worlds you inhabit." The idea of having Sarah in her small apartment, with its thrift store furniture and faded photographs from El Salvador, felt vulnerable, but also liberating. "Yes, that would be good. Perfect. And Maria Elena, thank you for trusting me with this." After hanging up, Maria Elena felt a strange sensation in her chest, not the familiar tightness of anxiety, but an unfamiliar expansion, as if she were breathing fully for the first time in years. That evening, she stayed late at the Ashworth house to finish preparations for the Thursday benefit committee meeting. As she arranged fresh orchids in the foyer, she found herself thinking about the $2 million they hoped to raise for the Children's Hospital. It was a worthy cause, and she didn't begrudge their philanthropy, but she couldn't help noticing the irony. They would spend more on flowers and catering for this single meeting than they paid her in 6 months. Working late again, I see. Maria Elena turned to find Madison standing in the doorway, still in her school uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder. The teenager looked tired, and there was something in her expression that seemed older than her 17 years. "Just finishing up for tomorrow's meeting, Miss Madison." "The benefit thing. Mom's been stressed about it all week." Madison dropped her backpack and slumped against the doorframe. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever get tired of it? All this?" Madison gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. "I mean, I know you work here and everything, but doesn't it ever feel like too much?" The question was so unexpected, so perceptive, that Maria Elena paused in her flower arranging. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. All the stuff, all the expectations, all the performance. Sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating in it." Madison's voice was small, vulnerable in a way Maria Elena had never heard before. "Like, my parents have my whole life planned out. Which college, which sorority, which career will look good at their cocktail parties, but nobody ever asks what I actually want." Maria Elena felt a stab of recognition, a young person feeling invisible in her own life, her dreams and desires considered irrelevant. It was painfully familiar. "What do you want, Miss Madison?" "I want to travel, not just vacation resorts, but real travel. I want to teach English abroad, maybe join the Peace Corps. I want to live in places where people don't care about my last name or how much money my family has." Madison laughed bitterly. "Can you imagine my parents' reaction if I told them I wanted to be a volunteer teacher in some rural village? Maria Elena's breath caught. Here was this privileged teenager, dreaming of exactly the kind of work Maria Elena had once done, the work that had been her passion and purpose. The irony was almost overwhelming. Teaching is important work, Maria Elena said carefully. Some of the most important work there is. You think so? My parents think it's just something to do until you find a real career. Madison studied Maria Elena's face. You said you used to be a teacher. Did you like it? For a moment, Maria Elena forgot the boundaries between employer and employee, between the worlds she inhabited. I loved it. Teaching literature to young people, watching them discover the power of words, helping them find their own voices. It was the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. Why did you stop? The simple question hung in the air between them, loaded with 23 years of compromise and survival and dreams deferred. Maria Elena could have given her usual deflection, but something in Madison's earnest expression made her want to be honest. Life happened. I came here planning to continue teaching, but the path was harder than I expected. I had to work, to survive, to help my family back home. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that I deserved to chase my dreams too. Madison was quiet for a long moment. Do you think it's too late to go back to teaching? I don't know, Maria Elena admitted. I'm trying to find out. Good for you. Madison straightened up, shouldering her backpack again. I hope you do it. And I hope I have the courage to disappoint my parents the way you had the courage to disappoint yours by coming here. As Madison headed upstairs, Maria Elena stood alone in the foyer, surrounded by expensive flowers and marble surfaces, processing the unexpected conversation. This privileged teenager saw courage in choices that Maria Elena had only seen as survival. Madison envied the freedom to make her own path, while Maria Elena had spent decades feeling trapped by the choices she'd made. But tomorrow, Sarah would come to her apartment with her camera and her questions, and Maria Elena would begin the process of stepping out of the shadows. Tomorrow, she would start telling the story of Maria Elena Vasquez, not the help, but the teacher, the student, the woman with dreams that refused to die. As she turned off the lights and locked the door behind her, Maria Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for the future. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely uncertain, but it was hers. The storm inside her was building, and she was no longer interested in containing it. Tuesday morning found Maria Elena standing in her small apartment, seeing it through a stranger's eyes for the first time. The cramped space that had been her refuge for over 2 decades suddenly felt exposed under the harsh light of potential judgment. She had spent the early hours cleaning obsessively, rearranging furniture, and hiding the most personal reminders of her former life. But as she waited for Sarah's arrival, something shifted in her perspective. This apartment, with its carefully maintained second-hand furniture, its walls decorated with photographs from El Salvador, its small kitchen table covered with education textbooks, this was her real home. This was where Maria Elena Vasquez lived, not where the help slept between shifts. When Sarah knocked at exactly 2 p.m., Maria Elena opened the door to find the photographer carrying not just her camera equipment, but a small bouquet of sunflowers and a bag from a local bakery. I brought coffee and pastries, Sarah said with a warm smile. I thought we could start by just talking, getting comfortable before we move to the formal interview. The gesture immediately put Maria Elena at ease. Sarah wasn't here to exploit or judge. She was here to listen, to understand, to honor Maria Elena's story with the respect it deserved. As they settled at the kitchen table with steaming cups of coffee, Sarah's eyes moved appreciatively around the apartment. This is lovely, Maria Elena. It feels so warm and personal. It's small, Maria Elena said automatically, the old habit of apologizing for her circumstances. It's yours, Sarah corrected gently, and it tells a story. Look at these photographs. Your family, your students. Maria Elena nodded, following Sarah's gaze to the wall where she had carefully arranged framed pictures from her life in El Salvador. My parents, my sister's family, some of my former students. I keep in touch with a few of them on Facebook. Tell me about them. For the next hour, Sarah listened as Maria Elena shared stories she hadn't told in years, about her father, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for her university education, about her mother, who had taught her to see education as the one thing no one could take away, about her students, bright, eager young people who had written poetry about love and revolution, who had dreamed of changing their country through words and ideas, "You light up when you talk about teaching," Sarah observed. "Your whole face changes." "Do I?" Maria Elena touched her cheek unconsciously. I suppose I haven't talked about it in so long." After a while, it started to feel like someone else's life. But it wasn't someone else's life, it was yours. It still is yours. Sarah pulled out her camera, handling it with the reverence of someone who understood the power of images. "Would you be comfortable if I started taking some pictures while we talk? Sometimes people are more natural when they're focused on the conversation rather than the camera." Maria Elena nodded, though her stomach fluttered with nervousness. She had avoided cameras for years, had trained herself to step out of frame when the Ashworth family posed for their endless photographs. Being the subject rather than the invisible presence felt revolutionary. "Tell me about your first day working for the Ashworths," Sarah said, adjusting her camera settings. "I was so nervous," Maria Elena began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "I had only been in Boston for 2 years, and my English was still very uncertain. Mrs. Ashworth, she was younger then, maybe 30, she walked me through the house like I was being given a tour of a museum. 'Don't touch this, be careful with that. This is how we like things done.' She never asked about my background, my education, anything about me as a person." The camera clicked softly, but Sarah's attention never wavered from Maria Elena's face. "How did that make you feel? Invisible, like I was being hired to be a machine, not a human being." Maria Elena paused, surprised by her own honesty. "I told myself it was temporary, just until I could improve my English, get my credentials recognized, save enough money to start over as a teacher." "What changed?" "Life, responsibilities. My mother got sick and needed expensive treatment. My sister's husband lost his job. The money I was sending home became essential for their survival." Maria Elena's voice grew quieter. "And every year the dream of teaching again felt a little more impossible." Sarah lowered her camera. "But you never gave up entirely. You're taking classes now." "Yes." A small smile played at Maria Elena's lips. "At night, after work. I've been working toward my ESL teaching certification for 5 years. Very slowly, very carefully. I was afraid to hope for too much." "What are you afraid of?" The question hung in the air, and Maria Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "Failing, being rejected again, discovering that I'm too old, that I've been away from teaching too long, that my accent is too thick, or my credentials aren't good enough. I'm afraid of wanting something so much and having it taken away again." Sarah's next photos captured something raw and honest, the fear and hope warring in Maria Elena's expression, the vulnerability of a woman who had spent decades protecting herself through invisibility. "Can I show you something?" Sarah asked, setting down her camera and pulling out her phone. She scrolled through several screens before finding what she was looking for. "This is from my grandmother's immigration records, from when she came to Boston in 1947. She handed Maria Elena the phone, which displayed a faded document with careful handwriting. Under occupation was written, "Domestic servant." But in small print at the bottom, someone had noted, "Former secondary school teacher, County Cork." "She was a teacher too," Maria Elena whispered. "For 15 years in Ireland, but when she got to America, none of that mattered. She was just another Irish girl who could clean houses." Sarah's voice carried a thread of old anger. She worked for wealthy families in Cambridge for 30 years and never once got to use her education, her intelligence, her passion for literature. Did she ever regret coming here? I don't think so. She had opportunities here that she never would have had in Ireland, but I think she regretted becoming invisible, letting other people define her worth. Sarah took her phone back, but her eyes remained fixed on Maria Elena. "That's why this project matters to me. That's why your story matters." As the afternoon progressed, Sarah moved around the apartment, capturing images that told the story of Maria Elena's dual existence. The education textbooks stacked beside her bed, the worn copy of 100 Years of Solitude, with margin notes in Spanish, the letter from a former student in El Salvador, telling her about his successful career as a journalist. "These books," Sarah said, photographing the small shelf of literature that Maria Elena had collected over the years. "Do you still read in Spanish?" "Every night before bed. It helps me remember who I am." Maria Elena pulled down a slim volume of Neruda's poetry. "I used to have my students memorize this one. Puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche." "What does it mean?" "Tonight I can write the saddest lines," Maria Elena translated, her voice taking on the cadence of someone who had taught poetry for years. "It's about loss, about memory, about how we carry our past within us, even when everything else changes." Sarah's camera captured the moment, Maria Elena holding the book like a talisman, her expression soft with memory and longing. "Would you read it?" "In Spanish?" Sarah asked. "I'd love to record you reading poetry in your native language." For a moment, Maria Elena hesitated. Reading poetry aloud felt like stepping fully into her former identity as an educator, as someone whose voice had once commanded respect and attention. But then she opened the book and began to read, her voice growing stronger with each line. The words flowed like water after a long drought, filling the small apartment with the music of her first language, her true language. As she read, she could almost feel her students sitting before her, could almost smell the chalk dust, and hear the sounds of the school courtyard in San Salvador. When she finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "That was beautiful. Your voice completely changed. You became someone else." "I became myself," Maria Elena corrected. "The self I was before I learned to disappear." The revelation hung between them, heavy with implication. For 23 years, Maria Elena had been playing a role, hiding her true self so completely that she had almost forgotten who she really was. "What would happen if you stopped disappearing?" Sarah asked. "What would happen if you let the Ashworths see who you really are?" The question sent a chill through Maria Elena. "I could lose my job. I need this job. But what if you didn't need it anymore? What if you had other options?" "I'm not young anymore, Sarah. I'm 52. Even if I finish my certification, who's going to hire a 52-year-old immigrant teacher with an accent? Someone who recognizes that experience and wisdom and passion matter more than age or accent." Sarah's voice was firm with conviction. "Someone who understands that the best teachers are those who have lived in multiple worlds, who understand struggle and resilience." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the apartment, Sarah packed up her equipment. But before leaving, she turned to Maria Elena with serious eyes. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer. This photography project, it's going to be exhibited in galleries, published in magazines, shared online. Once your story is out there, there's no taking it back. Are you prepared for that? Are you ready to stop being invisible?" Maria Elena walked to her window, looking out at the neighborhood where she had lived in anonymity for over 2 decades. Tomorrow, she would go back to the Ashworth house, would resume her role as the help. But something fundamental had shifted during this afternoon. She had remembered who she was before fear and necessity had taught her to hide. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I'm ready to be seen." As Sarah left, Maria Elena remained at the window, watching the lights come on in apartments across the street. Each window represented a life, a story, dreams and struggles invisible to passers-by. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was watching life from the outside. She felt like she was finally ready to step back into her own. The woman who would return to work tomorrow would still be called Maria by people who couldn't be bothered to learn her full name. But she would know with crystalline clarity that she was Maria Elena Vasquez, teacher, student, poet, dreamer, and so much more than anyone had bothered to see. The storm of change she had felt building was about to break, and she was no longer afraid of getting caught in the rain. 3 weeks after the photography session, Maria Elena stood in the Ashworth kitchen at 6 a.m., her hands trembling slightly as she prepared the family's breakfast. Today was different. Today, Sarah's exhibition, Invisible Women, The Hidden Lives of Boston's Domestic Workers, would open at the gallery on Newbury Street, and Maria Elena's portrait, her story, would be displayed for the world to see. She had barely slept, oscillating between excitement and terror. The photograph Sarah had chosen was powerful. Maria Elena sitting at her kitchen table, reading Neruda's poetry, her face illuminated by afternoon light streaming through her apartment window. The accompanying text told her story in her own words: teacher turned domestic worker, dreams deferred but not abandoned, a woman reclaiming her voice after decades of silence. "Good morning, Maria," Mrs. Ashworth entered the kitchen wearing her silk robe, already scrolling through her phone. The casual use of the shortened version of her name, the same thoughtless diminishment she had endured for 23 years, hit Maria Elena differently now. Each mispronunciation felt like a small violence, a deliberate erasure of her identity. "Good morning, Mrs. Ashworth. Your coffee is ready." "Perfect. Oh, and I'll need you to work late tonight. We're having a small dinner party. Just 8 people, but you know how these literary types can be about their wine pairings." Catherine settled at the kitchen island, still absorbed in her phone. "Some gallery opening downtown has everyone talking. Apparently it's causing quite a stir in social circles." Maria Elena's breath caught. the exhibition. Word was already spreading through Boston's elite community, the very community that employed countless women like her. Literary types? Maria Eleanor asked, her voice carefully neutral. Oh, you know, professors and writers and that crowd. They love their causes. Catherine waved dismissively. This photographer is apparently showcasing domestic workers or something, making some point about invisible labor. Rather dramatic, if you ask me. The irony was so sharp it nearly made Maria Elena laugh. Here was Mrs. Ashworth, discussing an exhibition that featured her own employee, completely oblivious to the woman standing 3 feet away preparing her breakfast. I see, Maria Elena said, turning back to the stove to hide her expression. The whole thing sounds rather exploitative to me. I mean, these women agreed to be photographed, so they can't be that invisible, can they? Catherine's tone carried the casual dismissal of someone who had never questioned her own privilege. Though I suppose it's good that people are talking about the value of domestic help. Maybe it will make our friends more appreciative of their staff. Maria Eleanor gripped the spatula tighter, feeling the familiar surge of anger that had been building for weeks. But this time, instead of swallowing it down, she let it fuel her courage. Mrs. Ashworth, she said, turning around, her voice steadier than she felt. May I ask you something? Catherine looked up from her phone with mild surprise. In 23 years, Maria Eleanor had never initiated a conversation beyond logistics and schedules. Of course, what is it? Do you know my full name? The question hung in the air between them, simple but loaded with decades of accumulated indignity. Catherine's perfectly manicured eyebrows drew together in confusion. Your name? It's Maria, isn't it? My full name is Maria Elena Vasquez. Each syllable was pronounced with deliberate precision, reclaiming the identity that had been shortened and simplified for the convenience of others. I've worked for your family for 23 years, and you've never once asked what I prefer to be called. Catherine's mouth opened slightly, a flush creeping up her neck. I assumed. Maria is easier to remember. Easier for whom? The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort across Catherine's composed features. For the first time in their decades-long relationship, she seemed to really see Maria Eleanor, not as an extension of the household appliances, but as a person with feelings and dignity. Maria Elena, Catherine said carefully, testing the name. I apologize. I didn't realize it mattered to you. It matters because it's my name. It matters because I'm a person, not just the help. Maria Eleanor set down the spatula and faced her employer fully. I was a teacher before I came to work for you. I have a university degree. I speak 3 languages. I have dreams and aspirations and a life beyond these walls. Catherine stared at her, clearly struggling to reconcile this articulate, confident woman with the silent figure who had moved through her house for over 2 decades. A teacher? Catherine's voice was small. You never mentioned, you never asked. The simple truth hung between them, heavy with implication. Before Catherine could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Madison walked in, already dressed for school. She stopped short, sensing the tension in the air. Everything okay? Madison asked, her eyes moving between the 2 women. Yes, Maria Elena said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Everything is fine. Better than fine, actually. Madison poured herself orange juice, studying Maria Elena with curious eyes. You seem different lately, more, I don't know, present. I'm remembering who I am, Maria Elena replied, the truth of it ringing clear in her voice. Good for you, Madison said with genuine warmth. I've been thinking about what you said, about teaching, about following dreams even when they're complicated. I applied to volunteer with a literacy program in Guatemala for this summer. I haven't told my parents yet. Catherine's head snapped up. Guatemala? Madison, you can't be serious. I am serious, Mom. And Maria Elena, Madison turned with a smile, using her full name naturally, without effort. She's the one who inspired me to think about teaching, about using education to make a real difference. The moment crystallized for Maria Elena with perfect clarity. Here was a young woman who saw her as more than furniture, who valued her wisdom and experience. Here was proof that her story, her dreams, her identity mattered. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Sarah. Exhibition opening in 2 hours. Your portrait is beautiful. Are you coming? Maria Eleanor looked at the message, then at the 2 women staring at her. Catherine with dawning awareness and discomfort, Madison with admiration and support. Mrs. Ashworth, Maria Eleanor said, sliding her phone back into her pocket. I need to tell you something else. I'm featured in that gallery exhibition you mentioned. The one about invisible domestic workers. Catherine's face went pale. You're... what? I shared my story about being a teacher, about working here, about what it's like to be treated as invisible for 23 years. Maria Elena's voice grew stronger with each word. My photograph will be displayed today, along with my words about dignity and dreams and the cost of survival. You talked to reporters about our family, about working here? Catherine's voice pitched higher with each question. I talked about my experience, my life, my truth. I never mentioned your family by name. Maria Elena paused, then added with quiet dignity, though if people recognize the implications, perhaps that says something worth examining. Madison's eyes were bright with something between excitement and pride. That's amazing, Maria Elena. You're going to inspire so many people. But Catherine's expression had hardened into something cold and calculating. This is a breach of trust, Maria. After everything we've done for you, giving you steady employment, a reliable income, giving me, Maria Elena's voice cut through the air like steel. I have earned every penny through my labor. I have given you 23 years of my life, maintaining your home, caring for your family, working overtime without complaint. You have given me nothing but a paycheck in exchange for making me invisible. The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from Beacon Hill's quiet streets. I think, Maria Elena continued, her voice calm but resolute, that it's time for me to find a position where I can be seen as a whole person, not just a pair of hands that clean and cook. Are you quitting? Catherine asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been fear. I'm choosing myself, Maria Elena replied. For the first time in 23 years, I'm choosing my dignity, my dreams, my worth as a human being. She untied her apron, the uniform that had symbolized her invisibility for so long, and placed it on the counter. The gesture felt ceremonial, like shedding an old skin to reveal something new and vital underneath. The exhibition opens at 6 o'clock, she said, walking toward the kitchen door. If you're curious about the woman who has been caring for your family all these years, you're welcome to come and finally meet Maria Elena Vasquez. As she left the Ashworth house for the last time, Maria Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in over 2 decades: complete freedom. The morning air carried the scent of autumn leaves and possibilities, and for the first time in years, she wasn't rushing towards someone else's schedule, someone else's priorities. She had a gallery opening to attend, where her portrait would hang alongside other invisible women who had found the courage to step into the light. She had a teaching certification to complete, dreams to pursue, a voice to reclaim. Behind her, the Ashworth house stood pristine and perfectly maintained, a monument to wealth and privilege. But it no longer contained any part of her. Not her labor, not her dignity, not her dreams. Maria Elena Vasquez walked down Beacon Hill's tree-lined streets as herself, fully and completely, for the first time in 23 years. The woman who had asked, "What do you dream of?" had given her the greatest gift of all, permission to remember that her dreams were worth fighting for. That evening, standing in a gallery surrounded by portraits of women who had been invisible for too long, Maria Elena watched as visitors read her story, saw her face, learned her name. A young woman approached her, tears in her eyes. "Are you Maria Elena Vasquez?" the woman asked. "The teacher in the exhibition?" "Yes," Maria Elena replied, her voice clear and strong. "I am. My mother was a domestic worker too. She always told me education was the key to freedom, but she never got to use her own education here in America. Your story, it gives me hope that it's never too late to reclaim our dreams." As they talked, teacher to student, dreamer to dreamer, Maria Elena felt the final pieces of her old self fall away. She was no longer the help who disappeared into other people's lives. She was Maria Elena Vasquez, and her story would help light the way for others to step out of the shadows and into their own power. The transformation was complete. The invisible woman had chosen to be seen, and the world would never look the same.